on mute.
There we go.
How's you guys' weekend?
All right. Good afternoon.
A repeat of every weekend, it seems.
Welcome to Foresight's Restart and Resiliency Program, our webinar on export readiness. A few housekeeping items. We will be recording this for posterity's sake and to share with the people who weren't able to make it at this time. If you could keep yourselves on mute, if you're not talking, that would be greatly appreciated. And to get things started, as usually people take a few minutes to roll into Zoom meetings. I know we got started a minute late there, but I'm just going to ask everyone here, when you're looking at exporting or as you define it, will you be exporting a physical product or will you be licensing a technology abroad? Just jump in there, warm up those little chat fingers. We want you ready to ask questions as we go throughout. So we're going to start by asking you some questions. I wouldn't say no to both. That's my favorite answer. Take it as it comes.
How do I type?
Excellent. We've got some licensing people. We've got some people selling physical products. We've got some people looking at all the options. The next question I'm going to ask is, when do you think you'll be exporting these products? Is this going to be in the 0 to 3 months range? Are you currently exporting products, or sort of more later this year, Q3, Q4, or possibly even well into the future next year, and you're just really learning what that path should look like? Rick's currently been at it for 2 years. Michael looks like he wants to get at it as soon as possible. Taylor, again, yes, open to all options. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Foreign market development starts in March. So a sort of mix of some people who are doing it in the short term and some people who are looking at it in the medium to long term. Fantastic. I think we've given a little bit of time for everybody to show up. Clearly, you've demonstrated you are present, mind, body, and soul. So we'll move on. Talk a little bit of what we're going to be doing today. I recognize many of the faces here, so you know I like to ramble. That's what I call the introduction. I will also be introducing our speakers today. Someone from the Trade Commissioner Service, someone from Export Development Canada, and finally from MNP, before we go into your questions. In terms of questions, I mentioned, feel free to use that chat box throughout. I will be moderating those questions. If they feel pertinent, I may interrupt the speaker to ask them that question to elaborate on something. If it feels a little bit like it could be left for later and we don't want to disturb the flow of the information coming at us, then I will hold those till the end of the talks. Make sense to everybody? There we go. I got a thumbs up. That's all I need to keep going. Today, we have 3 wonderful people. We have Mylan Savjord, the Trade Commissioner for the Pacific Regional Office from Global Affairs Canada. Mylan is the tasked with the clean tech sector among a number of other sectors. So he is definitely knowledgeable about possibly some of your companies and certainly the sectors that you'll be selling into abroad. And he'll be sharing a little bit of what they do, but I'll give him a chance now to introduce himself.
Yep. Hi, folks. Thanks, Stephen. Mylan Savjord with the Vancouver Regional Office here, Global Affairs Canada. I am responsible for renewable energy, carbon capture, clean tech, and the extractives. Yeah, happy to be here and chat.
Thank you very much. The next speaker would be Tammy Huston, the Global Accounts Director. I think everybody likes the sound of that, from Export Development Canada. Tammy has appeared on a number of our events, and I think if you're in our current cohort, you may see her again later this month if you're lucky. Tammy, how would you describe the expertise and knowledge that you bring to the field?
You're starting off with the hard questions already. Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everybody. So Tammy Huston with EDC. So I manage EDC's portfolio of clean tech accounts and prospects for Western Canada, which provides me with a fairly diverse view of companies across the region. So I manage anything clean tech related, in all industry segments. And really, I would characterize that as, I don't think of clean tech as a sector specifically, but more as an enabler to many sectors. So I see all types of companies working across a lot of verticals with a lot of different business models. So, happy to field any questions later, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about what we do and what we see on the export readiness side when we get into the specifics. Thanks, Stephen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tammy. Last but not least, Katri Ulmonen, the International Tax Services Partner at MNP. Katri, how would you describe your role and your organization?
First, I've got to say, Steve, you actually said my last name correctly. So that's like, you get superstars for that. I've said to people, how do you pronounce it? You just say aluminum really fast, which is kind of appropriate for this clean tech sector. So I'm part of MNP. I'm a partner in our international tax services. So we help companies when they're structuring going out of Canada or coming into Canada. I'm also the BC leader of technology sector clients. So they're very much connected to the clean tech and all technology related.
Thank you very much, Katri. I've skipped over myself because you all know me and I know you're busy and we want to get down to the valuable pieces. But what Foresight is trying to do is grow the clean tech ecosystem. And we can't do this by ourselves. Though we try really hard and we try to make the best connections for you, we try to do everything we can to support you, we can't do it all. What's fantastic is that we have partners like EDC, like Global Affairs Canada, Trade Commissioner, like MNP to help you out with those services. And their goals are very much aligned. One of the reasons they're here today, one of the reasons they're taking time out of their day to share some knowledge with you is because they win when the clean tech sector gets bigger. You guys also win by making the clean tech sector bigger. So we're all aligned, and it's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of different people. We realize it takes a village to raise the kind of companies that will have the impact around the world that we want. It will take lots of different parties to bring your technology to the state where it is making tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for the Canadian economy, where it is having a massive impact on the climate challenges that we are facing. And I think that is where we are all aligned today on this call. With that, you guys have probably heard enough from me. I will turn it over to our esteemed speakers, and we'll start with Mylan from the Trade Commissioner Service. Do you want to go ahead and share your screen there?
Great. Yeah, here we go. Let's see if this is going to work here.
Fantastic.
So are you, yeah, okay. It didn't quite work out how we did it yesterday.
I think if you go over to that slideshow button and hit start from beginning, Will.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks. My name is Mylan Savjord. I'm going to talk about the Trade Commissioner Service, some of the services we provide, including some of the funding we do, and then maybe give a little example of a company I've been working with recently, and then happy to kind of take questions at the end. So just sort of a broad overview. First of all, the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service is part of Global Affairs Canada. We have trade commissioners in 160 cities around the world. And that's really our big value add is those folks in markets having a good understanding of who's there and finding opportunities for you. We also do have several funding programs of probably particular interest. So the largest funding program we have is Can Export SMEs, but then there's also the Can Export Innovation Program. So depending on sort of where you're at on a sort of commercialization level and what your proposed business activities are in international markets, one of those might be better for you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. and business supports. Yeah, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So we have sort of a broad client definition, as you can see here, sort of three main sort of components. The number one is, do you have capacity for commitment to internationalization? And to be honest, this is kind of a moving goalpost, because it kind of depends on what you're looking for from us to help you with. So that can kind of depend on, are you trying to approach, the Google or the BMW? Well, you need to have a pretty significant demonstrated capacity for really targeting that. If you're trying to sell to them, if you're looking for an R&D partnership, maybe we've got an opportunity to put you in front of, maybe a pitch challenge that they're putting forward. In that stage, in that case, you could be, a different capacity. Meaningful economic ties. Really, what we want to see on this is that, in general, sort of things like IP that's owned in Canada, staying in Canada. That's the plan. That you're looking to grow in Canada, and you can understand why. Really, we're a free service, and so we have a mandate to support the Canadian economy. And obviously, potential to contribute to Canada's economic growth. Really, we say we have 4 key services. We talk about sort of prep for international markets, and that's kind of what we're doing now. Having a conversation about what the Trade Commissioner Service does, what we can help you out with. And then we go into really the value add from our international markets, international trade commissioners. So that's really about market intelligence. They're going out there doing sort of the reverse. They're looking for the opportunities for you, for finding a buyer, finding a customer, finding an R&D partner. And also, having an understanding of the prevailing winds in terms of government regulation or sort of government priorities. What's this new incoming government going to prioritize in terms of infrastructure funding, or what's their hydrogen strategy? What's their renewable energy strategy? And sort of finding those opportunities for you. The other kind of key component is really key contacts. So this can be for a couple different things, but obviously the primary objective for most folks is finding customers, or helping them find the distributor to find the customer. And we do this in a lot of different ways, sort of on a one-on-one basis, but we also we'll run big B2B programs at international trade shows. So some of you may have attended a trade show in a foreign country where there's sort of the Canada Pavilion, and we sort of fly the flag to give increased sort of credibility. And then we bring in foreign buyers and set them up with Canadian companies. And then the fourth one is really about problem solving. And obviously this can be anything. I mean, the sort of quintessential example is, something, you've shipped something to a customer and it's stuck in customs. You've been working with a freight forwarder. You're under the impression that you've paid all your customs and duties, all the taxes, and you've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's, but it's still not moving for some reason, and you can't figure it out. Sometimes a call from the Canadian Embassy to understand what's going on can be helpful. So that's sort of the example I use in terms of problem solving. And I would say that kind of leads me to one of the points about using the Trade Commissioner Service in general. we are best placed to help you at an early stage, an early market entry stage. It's better to have a relationship with us before you get into trouble, so that we can help you avoid those problems. We can we can let you know both what freight forwarder to use, but also challenges with a local distributor or a local customer, issues around the legal environment for your product, that sort of thing. So I always recommend Canadian companies to kind of reach out at an early stage. So to our funding program, one of the sort of key funding programs I think that's relevant for this group is CanExport Innovation. So really this is for essentially a pre-commercial product technology, although it could be for validating a commercialized product in a new market, depending on sort of the technology and whether it's dependent on market variables to sort of validate the technology. So this program is designed pre-COVID. It's designed to pay for travel. Obviously, there's no travel right now. There's a government travel advisory, so it does not fund any travel. It does fund things like virtual meetings, as well as sort of things around IP, market-specific IP, and there is you are able to use it for some consulting fees. Really, what this funding program is about is building the partnership. So it's not about developing the R&D, it's about developing the partnership to develop the R&D. And like I said, it's designed to fund travel. So it is a challenge right now to have an application, if I'm being frank, an application that's worth applying. Obviously, many of you know, virtual meetings are virtually free. A lot of conferences are very inexpensive now because they're virtual. You don't have to pay for flights, hotels, that sort of thing. So we're seeing a decrease in the applications because there just isn't items to spend money on. It doesn't mean you can't do it, and I'll give you an example in a second.
Mylan,
The other
quick
project,
question,
yep.
Do those consulting fees include legal fees?
Yeah, so you'll see legal, tax, and business advice at the bottom here. What does it offer? And so, again, this is for market specific. So it's not a, legal advice for developing your product in Canada. It wouldn't be legal advice for kind of general legal advice. And even on the IP protection. So the IP protection would be about the target market. So you wouldn't be looking for IP protection in Canada, for example. And the business advice is the same idea. You would be able to potentially, you could look at hiring a consultant to do some sort of partnership development, scoping. And I'll give an example of that. Does that answer your question?
It wasn't my question, but certainly I think that's a great point that it does cover the IP protection.
The question was, does it cover legal advice?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
great.
Yeah.
That's something that lots of these companies can take advantage of.
Right. And I just, emphasize that it's a specific type of legal advice, right? It's not sort of general, can you hire a lawyer in Canada?
No, understood.
So the next program is CanExport SMEs. And this is is really for a commercialized product. In general, they like to see, there's a revenue of a minimum of $100,000 in the previous year, an incorporated company, etc. And really, this is sort of a marketing program. So you're already you have an established domestic sales in Canada. You may already be exporting, let's say, to the US or the UK, and you're now looking at France or Germany or Mexico or Asia, let's say. And what you want to do is travel to an international conference, trade show, and to meet new customers. So that's really what this is designed for. Again, a pre-COVID program that's really designed to pay for travel. It has been adapted to try and support Canadian companies through the difficult, COVID situation. Again, it's a challenge to really make an application sort of worth it, because trade shows are virtual. It will not pay for any travel. So again, it will look at intellectual property protection, legal, tax, and business advice, as well as marketing tools. This is a question we get a lot, like how does it pay for marketing tools? And it's really sort of like an individual question. And I'm happy to kind of, if you have a really specific question about will it pay for this marketing, it's probably best for us to take it offline. But in general, it will pay for things like search engine optimization. It will pay for sort of specific marketing, online marketing activities. But to be frank, it's a challenge because online marketing and search engine optimization, as you know, are not, it's difficult to make them market specific. So really figuring out what the actual cost of market specific sort of marketing, that's something that, you kind of have to do the work of, and we can talk, on an individual basis if you're looking at can export SMEs and that sort of, you have questions about that. I think sort of, I'll kind of jump in and give a quick example. We had a company recently reach out to we have a general inbox. They had heard about Can Export, the funding program. And this company makes sort of an aftermarket add-on product for wind turbines, or it's in development, the product that they're making. And so they reached out. I connected with them. They wanted to ask about the funding program. So I said, okay, let's have a conversation. We started talking about what they're looking to do, what stage they're at, sort of TRL, but also sort of their business capacity. And they had already they'd done some bench testing, and they were working with some folks at UBC. But really to take to the next level, they needed to find a partner that was a wind turbine manufacturer. And they'd done some initial research to identify that probably that partner was going to be in Denmark or the Netherlands. And they'd sort of started an initial partnership with a university in the Netherlands. But they were early stage. There was only a few folks, full time. They also had other jobs to pay the bills. So what we did is, the sort of first thing was connect them to our officers in both the Netherlands and in Denmark, to have a sort of initial scoping conversation and say, what does this look like? Where are you seeing Canadian companies in this market have success? Where are the challenges? What stage do they need to be at to really kind of, approach these types of companies? And then, we had a conversation about, whether the funding program would work. And what we sort of came to was that they were at the stage for the Can Export Innovation Program. This could be something that they could use to develop an R&D partnership. And probably because they hadn't, they needed to do a bit more work in terms of, what that sort of partnership development landscape looked like. That one of the items that they could look at funding from this program for would be a consultant in either the Netherlands or Denmark to really sort of suss out the market, see the market entry strategies, the R&D partnership strategies, who's who in the zoo, who's doing this type of work. And so last time we talked, they had sort of progressed their CAN export application and they were working on it. And then due to the connections with our office in Denmark, that office, as I say, they're going out there sort of doing these, the opposite of what I do. I meet with Canadian companies and tell them about the about the Trade Commissioner Service, and then connect them to the network. Our network goes out there and finds those opportunities. So after connecting with our office in Denmark, they set them up on a project that we actually partnered with Foresight on, called the SDG Connect Challenge, where our office and Foresight collaborated to work with a Danish wind turbine company and sort of ran a reverse pitch challenge. So, putting companies in front of this international buyer to sort of say, here's the technology we're looking at, what are your needs, what are your challenges, that sort of thing. And so that's sort of just an example of kind of the the trajectory of sort of an early stage company, and where the Trade Commissioner Service can help. The other thing is, part of our job is to do a bit of that, readiness training. And I think Tammy's going to talk a little bit about that as well. So you can go on our website. There's several, sort of resources for companies that may not have exported that much or may have only, sort of exported to the US, and are looking at sort of going further afield. So one of them is the export quiz. I definitely highly recommend everyone take a look at the export quiz. And then there's the step-by-step guide to exporting, which is on there as well. The other program I wanted to just quickly touch on is called the Canadian Technology Accelerator. This is a non-equity accelerator program designed to support global growth of technology companies, including life sciences, clean tech, and ICT. So there are several countries where this is run. There was just recently an ag tech CTA run out of Mexico. We just had a digital energy solutions CTA run out of Berlin, out of Germany. And sort of our longest standing clean tech accelerator is in the US, and it's run sort of as a partnership with several of our offices in the US, San Francisco, New York, Denver, and Washington. And it's a CTA that's really, it's designed to give you that sort of accelerated market entry. So there are some requirements, and if there's questions about that, I'm happy to kind of go into detail. But it's sort of it's a customized program for high growth companies in specific tech hubs around the world, and provides advice from mentors. So it's for companies that are looking for partners, both in terms of clients and investors. There is also this the CIIP. This is it's a sort of a yearly call for proposals program. So and it's in partnership with several other countries, and we work with NRC IRAP on this program. Each year, it's usually sort of one or two calls from one or two countries, and it's very usually quite specific, industry vertical. There was one recently with Brazil looking at mining technology, So that's one. Happy to talk a bit more about that one. And just a couple other quick comments there. We also have a Business Women in International Trade program that supports women-owned businesses, as well as an Indigenous business export program supporting Indigenous-owned companies. So I think that's it. Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mylan. And while for those of you who don't have revenue, he mentioned a program where there's $75,000 to help out what you're potentially doing in export markets. And if you do have revenue, there was a $15,000 to $75,000 program, and money is great. The real gold that he mentioned there would be those contacts. In my humble opinion,
I would agree.
Those would be those $1 million deals. And the best kind of non-dilutive funding you will ever find is customers, is people paying for your product. So that's where I would really highlight that thing that he sort of slipped in, and there was not a specific slide for it, but it's one of the fantastic parts of the Trade Commissioner service. Not that I'm an expert. I just get to.
No, you did a great job. Thank you. You're hired.
All right, up next we have Tammy Huston from Export Development Canada, and she has entrusted me to share her slides. So we will hope that this goes according to plan. Can everybody see that?
I can see it, so I'm going to suggest that's off to a good start. So thank you, Stephen. I'm entrusting you. That it's primarily because of my technology, lack of technology capabilities. So thanks for driving the show for me. And hi, everybody. Nice to be here with you today. Stephen, just going back to your previous comment about revenue, I would wholeheartedly agree. I used to have a colleague that suggested revenue solves all problems. So I think that is a very great way to get into why we're here today around exporting. You know, I want you to think, oh, sorry, let me just start out. Brief introductions. I already told you who I am. Just on I guess the most important part of this slide here is contact information. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to chat afterwards. My contact information is there for you. Please don't hesitate to do so. So I'll get you to move to the next slide, Stephen. So given that we're talking about export readiness, I wanted to give you a few sort of thoughts and things to consider. Now, none of these are going to be a surprise to you, but I think you know, many companies start their exporting journey by accident. You know, so you know, you're selling online, for example, and you end up shipping a product down to the US or somewhere in Europe, and it wasn't part of your plan. Somebody reached out, and you know, and you became an exporter. So it's, you know, not an atypical way to start, but I think once companies recognize the value of exporting, putting some thought and purposefulness into why you want to export is going to make you much more successful. And of course, the reason why many companies export is an increase in sales. Clearly, we know that you know, the markets outside of Canada are much bigger than they are here. So particularly within the clean tech sector, I think we all recognize that in order to be you know, if your aspirations are to become a large company that's competing on the world stage, you can't do that by just selling in Canada. The market is just too small here. So you have to go outside. And often I'm working with companies that don't even sell anything in Canada. You know, their only markets are outside. So, you know, increased sales, but also profitability. You know, typically you're going to find that the profits are higher with sales that come from outside of Canada. You know, particularly on a unique product, you can charge more for that. The margins are better, and you'll find your increase in profitability. Economies of scale. The more you produce, obviously, the better economies of scale that you can enjoy. And again, that comes from access to larger markets. Diversification in terms of markets as well. So if you're exporting, and we see this, you know, all the time, companies that are only exporting into the US, was things, you know, perhaps it's an economic downturn in the US, or there are some specific nuances within an industry sector in the U.S. I think we're all on the West Coast. We all know the longstanding issue in lumber, for example. So as the tides turn in one sector, opportunities can become more limited. So that market diversification can really help even out overall sales. And then, of course, creating resilience within the company as well. I think the great news is you don't have to be a large company to export. Size does not relate to success. So companies of all sizes export and achieve great success at that. So some of the things just to build on some of these points here, building your export plan. So do you have a domestic plan that's already effective? If you don't, I would suggest having a domestic plan is certainly appropriate, because the export plan should be an extension of that. Your plan should cover things like market risk, major competitor, your financing needs, commitment by the senior management to invest in exporting, and your staffing plans. What are your competitive advantages and disadvantages? You need to understand all of those things in order to be successful out selling, because people are going to ask you that. So I think, again, these are not things that you have to do on your own. There are lots of resources available to you. The quiz, I think it was the quiz that Mylan pointed out on the TCS website, certainly talks or walks you through some of the things that you should be thinking about. But as you're starting to put meat on the bones, the BDC, for example, has their consulting services that can help you really put some depth into a marketing plan. So, again, food for thought. They're going to charge for their services, so you have to decide, kind of what's important to you. Moving on to identifying target markets. Do you offer something niche to a specific market? Of course, that makes it all the more reason for you to look at exporting. So I think of some of the technologies that we see out here, some of the specific products. So targeting the mining sector. Well, if you're doing something in mining, then it makes a lot of sense to be looking at Chile, for example, or some other. There might be other countries in South America that make sense from a mining perspective. So, what sort of efficiencies can you create? Reduced water usage, for example. Again, a great market would be Chile in the mining sector. So, just to kind of give you a couple of examples. And then, of course, countries that have free trade agreements. Canada spends a lot of time negotiating free trade agreements for the benefit of our companies to make it easier for them to get into market. And so accessing market entry, kind of following along those free trade agreements makes your life a lot easier, and that's what they're intended to do. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily put the value in it. We hear a lot about the free trade agreements, but we don't necessarily put sort of the value on those, and it can certainly help your market entry strategy, as well as overall tax implications, as well as legal structures. Lots to think about on that front. And then I think sometimes maybe what we don't think about a lot of is how are you going to get your product to market? It's in some markets it's not that easy. So Mylan touched on finding a freight forwarder, and they can help with things like that. Again, all of those kind of things you need to start thinking about. And then as you're getting into finding customers, just expanding on Mylan's point around trade shows and the B2B programs that the Trade Commissioner Service offers. Again, don't discount the value of those potential connections. I have seen great results out of the local trade commissioners in market and the types of connections they have. I think sometimes people think well, it's government. There's not a lot they can do to help me. I know my sector, my market, and of course, nobody's going to know your company better than you do. But in terms of appropriate connections or connections within companies at the level you need them to be at a decision maker point of view, don't discount the value that the Trade Commissioner Service can bring, as well as other intermediaries. So certainly use your networks to create those markets and find targets. And then partnering, of course, with local companies with on-the-ground knowledge. So, I mean, these may not be appropriate for you, but food for thought. And then getting into financing, I think often not everybody realizes sort of the commitment that is required from a financing perspective either. So, if you're selling a product, it's likely going to be a longer conversion cycle from the time that you sell your product to the time that you actually get cash in hand. And how are you going to fund that sales cycle? If you have financing through a bank, will the bank give you some value for the receivables if they're not in Canada or United States? Typically, they're not going to. So how are you going to fund, kind of the need on the accounts receivable side and your margin requirements? So just, I guess, the other thing to think about on that side too is some of the incentive programs around that. So things like Shred, don't forget to take advantage of those types of programs. They can be great from a tax perspective. And then managing risk. So I'll talk a little bit more about this afterwards, but certainly understand what sort of payment terms are appropriate for the market that you're dealing in. If you went to the United States and asked somebody to prepay, you probably, people are going to maybe question that a little bit. They would expect to get terms out of you. But again, depending on sort of the segment that you're in. Software, obviously, you can, there tends to be more flexibility on that front. But if you're selling a product, the likelihood of you getting, cash in advance, I'm going to guess is pretty low. If you're selling it to Asia, for example, you're not necessarily going to extend open account payment terms, but you might want to think about the use of some of the other instruments, like a letter of credit, for example. So moving your credit risk from your buyer into a bank. But you have to understand how to use all of those tools as well. And then, there are mechanisms to help you lower the risk. So I'll touch on credit insurance afterwards. So if you are selling on payment, if you are extending payment terms to your buyers, allowing or giving yourself that protection that you're actually going to get paid. If you extend terms and you don't get paid, we call that foreign aid. And this is, my guess is that not many of you are in the business of foreign aid. So we'd like to see you get paid for what you do. And then finally, sustaining your growth. So, you have success in one market, that can really launch you into other markets as well. And how are you going to sustain that? So having the commitment of your management teams, the employees to, kind of to see you through success on that first market or your first market entry strategies, and then growing into other markets. That will certainly continue your export success, but also help you continue to innovate and, perhaps develop new products. So that's a really, really quick sort of food for thought on some of the things that I would consider if I were looking to export. And I'll touch on, I'll get you to move the slide, Stephen, to the next one, but some of the things that EDC does offer to help you in that exporting journey. So I did touch on insurance on receivables. So if you're extending payment terms and you want to make sure you get paid, you can get credit insurance that would cover off the risk of non-payment. So your buyer fails to pay because either they've gone bankrupt or they've simply defaulted. And let's be honest, when you're the furthest away and one of your buyers is having cash flow difficulties, you can be sure that, that the supplier that's furthest away is going to get paid last. It's harder for you to get to the door, to knock on the door and sit in the office waiting for payment. So you're likely to be the last to get paid. But I also mentioned from a financing point of view, so insurance can help you protect your receivables, but it can also be used for financing purposes as well. So, if you're margining receivables with a bank on a line of credit, they will take insured receivables and give you value for those. So that could be a real boost to companies that are that have a big portfolio of receivables outside of Canada. So not to discount the use of credit insurance from a financing perspective as well. So EDC does a number of things. We certainly offer credit insurance. We provide financing to companies that will help them access working capital. We typically do that through a banking relationship. So a company would have a bank, EDC would provide a guarantee to that bank to help leverage up the working capital available. There's quite a number of other solutions that we offer as well with respect to working capital. And I'd be happy to get into, I won't bore you with all of the details right now, but I think suffice to say, if you think of EDC from both a risk mitigation as well as a working capital point of view, you've got a lot of those things covered off. Some of you may have heard of our equity program as well. EDC does have a program where we invest in companies directly, and we've been quite active doing that throughout the pandemic with a matching program that we introduced, I guess, around April of last year as the world started to turn. So acknowledging that, equity was, maybe a little harder to come by just given the uncertainty in the markets. We came in with a matching program. It's been very successful. We've invested in a number of companies here in BC in particular. One of those I'll mention is, and it is public information, so happy to share that. So actually, I'll give you two names. So I know many of you will know Axine Water. EDC invested in Axine probably about last summer of last year. So working now with Axine or invested with them on an equity side, as well as Savante. So we're happy to participate alongside other investors, really to see Canadian clean tech companies grow. So we also provide knowledge and connection. So maybe in a more curated way than what the Trade Commissioner Service does, EDC does have a network of buyers that we work with, as well as business relationships worldwide. And the reason that we spend time with those companies is really to understand what are their needs. What sort of Canadian capabilities can we introduce to those companies? Again, helping companies access the right type of companies at the right stage and at the right level. So, we do that on a much more, I would say, smaller scale than what the Trade Commissioner Service does, but really looking to make use of some of those connections as well. Can you flip the slide? So when do you actually engage with EDC? We work with companies of all sizes, and particularly in the clean tech space, we tend to work a little bit earlier than we would in a diversified portfolio. So you've completed an SDTC project, if you want to attach a TRL level to it. So typically 7 would be about the earliest that we would generally be seeing companies. So a 7 to an 8. You're negotiating a contract, you have an order, you want to be able to secure that order. You need to post a performance bond, that could be to a supplier, it could be for a contract to ensure that you can actually do what you say you're going to do, or you have some financing requirements. And I'm going over that very, very quickly, but happy to answer questions afterwards. And just, kind of wrap up some thoughts on the next slide with a couple of resources that I think you should consider as well. So the Forum for International Trade Training, if you have a deep interest in getting into some more details around trade training, they have a whole series. I think I want to say it's about 8 modules of training where you get a lot more information around, Incoterms, for example. So not that it's not going to make you an expert, but certainly give you some depth of knowledge around the international trade side. And then we've got some resources on our website as well. So our Trade Insights will provide things like business plans, economic updates. Some of you may have heard our chief economist speak before. He's actually a great speaker, and he's great at making economics English. So I always enjoy listening to him and getting some insights around, where are we seeing opportunities from a market perspective? The countries that are going to be growing, what sort of things are they going to be looking for, and where does Canada, punch above its weight in terms of offering some of these things? So leave that with you. And then just my final thought: we are hosting actually a webinar on Thursday for mastering international contracts. So put the link there as well. That webinar is free. So if you want to get some more details around what to think about when you're drawing up your own contract for international purposes. Check that out as well. And it's we'll say it's actually offered at a time. It's offered at Ontario, but it's at a time that's suitable for us here in the West as well, which is always nice. And I'll leave it there. I probably took too much time, but went over everything very quickly and happy to answer questions.
Fantastic, Tammy. There is a quick question here from Riley. Does the EDC ensure startups export receivables, or do the companies need years of positive financials? So you sort of said you start working with companies around TRL 7, which is, really pre-commercial. Do you actually insure the receivables, or you take a higher risk profile than, other insurance companies?
Yeah, so with insurance, it could be your very first sale and it can be insured. And so when you think about insurance is actually taking the risk of the buyer as opposed to the risk of the seller. We're taking on credit risk of that foreign buyer. So, if you don't, as the Canadian supplier, if you don't perform under that contract and the buyer says, well, I'm not paying because, I got the product and it didn't actually work. That's not a risk that can be covered off under insurance. So that's a technical performance risk, but we will cover off the credit risk. So we'll look to see, is the buyer, do they have a good credit profile? Can they pay? Do they have a history of paying? What do their financials look like? So it can be the very first sale that a company ever makes. Yes, it can be insured.
Absolutely.
Hopefully that helps, Riley. And, feel free to, reach out to me. I can send you a link to our website. You can find out a bit more. A lot of that can actually be done over our website. You don't even need to work with anybody. You can get a quote on insurance if you want insurance on one receivable, on one sale, or if you want to do a portfolio of coverage. So it can be quite easy to set up.
That's great. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think Donovan has a great question, but it seems broad and expansive. So I will leave that until the end. We'll move on to Katri from MNP. And a wonderful segue, as Tammy was talking about getting paid. People who care about whether you get paid are your accountants. And obviously the tax implications will matter less if you're not getting paid. So Katri, do you want to share your screen, or shall I? Does it have a backup copy of your slides?
Yeah, I am saying share screen, but it doesn't seem to be popping up. So.
Okay, well then let us solve that problem right now.
Yeah, and I'm just going to stay off camera. It seems that with everybody being on Zoom and all the other things, the broadband is restricted, so to keep my data flow limited. So I'm going to kind of switch gears here for everybody, talk about some nuts and bolts and exporters and cross-border tax primer, because of course, when you start expanding your market, you are going to be subject to other governments and their desire to tax you. And really, this is about managing tax risk, and we call it practicing safe tax, and so that you don't have any surprises. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about MNP in case you haven't heard of us. We are the 5th largest CPA firm in Canada, proudly Canadian. We have a staff of and partners of somewhere hovering around 5,000, I think. We have 75 offices across Canada, including 20 just in BC. So we're very much part of the Canadian footprint. We provide services to all sectors. I specialize in technology and tax because they go together really nicely. And we also have, Tammy mentioned SHRED and IRAP. Those are Government of Canada offers great programs compared to what we see really internationally. So it's great. And we have partners, Terry Trachek, who leads our Western Canadian SHRED practice. Great success in getting SHRED for clients in clean tech. And I'm glad to see that the money, SHRED claims are going in and money's flowing back to the companies within 2 weeks. And, so it's a great program and really great to take advantage of it. Next slide, please. So when you're expanding your footprint, what's really important to realize is that it doesn't really matter what you're selling, whether it's software as a service, whether it's tangible goods, services, or bundled services, which is often when you end up having, for example, an installation project where you sell the actual product and then you go to do the install. This, of course, is all pre-COVID when we were allowed to travel still, but it's still happening. There's still, we're still consulting with clients who are sending people with the Canadian expertise, but they're needed, their boots are needed on the ground. So it does still happen, just not as much. And the other thing to consider is, I think what's happened with COVID is really just really accelerated all governments needing cash. We've had a whole bunch of money supply that's gone into the economy. And for those of you who don't know, all that money comes from us through taxes. Governments actually don't make money, we do. And so I think there's going to be this acceleration of taxation and looking at how to tax companies. And international companies are really nice to tax because they don't vote. They don't have employees who generally vote. So that's why you're seeing a lot of change in the tax landscape. And OECD has been very active in this market as well, taking a look at global tax reform and taxing digital platforms, what we call the Airbnb and Netflix tax. And in fact, Canada's introducing that July 1 to level the playing field, to have GST apply on Netflix as well as Airbnb type services. There's a question about what do we think about what's going to happen with the US Buy America program. I think from a tax landscape, and Tammy and Mylan, please comment as well. Usually these Buy America programs are for domestic consumption as a marketing pitch. I think all governments realize how important trade is. Just try and build a car in Canada or in the US without the other country. You'd have no wheels, might not have a steering column, so global trade is very important. And I think, there was an announcement today in the paper that Canada's working actively with the US, in the US wanting to do more hydroelectric power. So that's another area where we really excel. Next. So what we often see from a tax perspective is a company's journey. What happens when you go into a foreign country? Often it starts with direct sales. Someone finds out about your product and you ship your product across. That's sort of the first foray. Then often what happens is you end up having an agency relationship. For example, if you're selling equipment, you might hire a local independent agent to act on your behalf. That usually then kicks you to a sales and marketing office that you actually have what we call boots on the ground. And whether you're taxable in that country or not really depends on the level of activity. And then when you're really ready to be in a country, often you go into a subsidiary of a Canadian company. So this is a typical journey that companies go through. Next. And so the types of tax exposure, and this is why we call it practicing safe tax, because there's so many different broad taxes that can apply. Duties generally apply in that first instance when you've got direct sales and you find out that on entry, your product is going to be subject to a 20% duty because of its components. And I think both EDC and the Trade Commission these are where they can really help with their services in negotiating, as well as a good brokerage team. So the threshold for duties is extremely low. Then you've, of course, got the famous value-added taxes, which is the Canadian GST and LRPST. That threshold is also very low, so that is a surprise to a lot of companies when they are exporting, that they may have to charge VAT taxes on any product, or even now services, as well as any kind of SaaS that can be subject to that. Payroll taxes, of course, are a function of having employees in a country. So it could be that you have a sales office, but you may not have a true business, but you're still subject to employee payroll withholding. If you're European countries, you'd be surprised how high their social security taxes are, as is the US compared to Canada. So there's a lot of surprise that can come as a result. And then, of course, being subject to income tax is generally as a result of having a permanent establishment. And I added that picture of there's a model tax convention. So if you wonder what tax accountants do, try and fall asleep. This is what we read. So there's countries around the world, much like we have, Tammy mentioned the trade agreements. There are also equivalent tax agreements that lower the threshold of a foreign country being able to tax a company from outside of that. And most tax conventions follow within those rules. So that's really important. And then, of course, on return of capital to Canada, there's usually a withholding tax applies on distribution. So structuring your investment and your operations in a foreign country, it really has these 5 fingers of tax that can attach to you. And so it's really important to know those in advance and work through those. Next slide. And then because I looked at the companies that Steve opened up with questions, there's a lot of people who are going to the US, and of course they are being our largest market and closest ally for trading. And now that we have normalized relations again, I think we're all have a relief, a sigh relief coming through. So in the US, what's important to know is that there are really 3 levels of taxation that can apply. There's the federal. There's each of the states. Most of the states have tax filing requirements for companies. And then there's what we affectionately call SALT, which is sales and local tax. So that's their equivalent of VAT tax, and actually more broader than that. And so what can happen is, like, let's say you're a company that you are exporting to the US, and you have your product is shipped free on board destination. So you may have, for US federal purposes, to be deemed to have a business in the US. However, the tax treaty between Canada and the US would override you actually having to be subject to US taxation. But there's a filing requirement that follows that. States, however, the individual states do not, in general, follow the treaty. So you can have economic nexus within a state, but not be subject to US federal taxation. And those are usually based on revenue factors, payroll, and property. So there's a tax filing requirement there as well. And then there was a case that came out a number of years ago called Wayfair, which I don't know about you guys, but pandemic has brought Wayfair and Amazon to my doorstep just about on a regular basis. So it basically allowed states now to charge sales tax. And the threshold is very low. So you're subject to collecting sales tax if your revenues in a state are 100,000 or more, or you have 200 transactions. So 200 transactions sounds like a lot, unless you're a SaaS company, and then you get that 200 threshold rather quickly. So it's important to note, especially for the US, because of their multiple levels of taxation, that it's a big net you can get caught in. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm sure Stephen will share our contact details. Glad to always chat through and help you structure how you go down into any country, but that's a typical journey that we see.
Well, I'll start with the first question for Katri. When you set up the tax structure so that everything goes through Barbados, you have to set up a meeting where we go there in person, right?
Well, if you go to Barbados, it's really important that you have regular meetings there, because, and I'm serious, if you actually want to do a Barbados structure, it is not an inexpensive venue. I'm still waiting for a client to invite me to Barbados. So if you guys, any of you are expanding, please, glad to sit on your board and make regular visits to Barbados.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. As with all of the webinars we run, I can ask questions. Some of them will be serious. Some of them will be somewhat less serious. These people all came here to answer your questions and help you guys out. So do jump in the chat there and let me know what you guys are thinking about, concerned about, looking at doing, want answers to. I'm going to, and Katri sort of did jump on to Donovan Woolen's question about the Biden's new Buy America, but I'm going to toss that one over also to Tammy and Mylan there. Tammy, were you following that? Does EDC have an opinion? And I know on some of the customer types that might not have an impact. Are there some areas where you think for ICT or clean tech that will have an impact, that Buy American program?
So I think it certainly is a complicated question in that I would agree with Katri that it's often motivated by political purposes, but companies can get companies can get caught up in the challenges of Buy America. So we certainly see companies setting up U.S. subsidiaries in order to, I don't want to say bypass the act, but maybe to adhere more strictly to Buy America. I think we're starting to see or are seeing a trend in whatever you want to call it. Glocalization is one of the terms that I've heard. So, or onshoring, where moving your supply chain closer to home. So, or diversifying the supply chain as well. So, when hopefully we don't go through another year-long lockdown because of a pandemic anytime. But I think this is all brought to the forefront, the importance of having access to your supply chain. So if you are, getting all of your inputs out of China or out of Asia in particular, at the outset of the pandemic, that it certainly was difficult to, maybe carry on with what you're doing. So we're starting to see a bit more onshoring or localization of supply chains. So, I think the question around, Buy America or, buy local, I think it's certainly not one that's going to go away, but I think companies have long found ways to operate within the necessary framework that the governments have set out.
And often from a tax perspective, we found this with Patriot Act. A lot of Canadian companies end up setting U.S. subsidiaries that were corporations to deal with the U.S. Buy America, because then or you can are manufactured or put together in the U.S. So there's always a different way to skin a cat.
I would say then the other thing that you have to think about when setting up a U.S. subsidiary, well, many things to think about, but one of those becomes financing. So if you are trying to get financing for that local subsidiary, your Canadian bank is probably not that keen on lending into another jurisdiction, but a local bank is also not keen on lending to a company that doesn't have that doesn't have a local head office. So, among the tax issues and many other complications, think about the financing needs that subsidiary will have as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll just kind of add to a couple of those points. Definitely agree with both Tammy and Katri in terms of ways around some of these challenges. Whether it's local subsidiary, other strategies. I mean, obviously we have to be aware that, generally those things add costs, right? So sometimes, you're competitive from Canada shipping directly, but setting up a local subsidiary, having some kind of assembly or manufacturing in the US can suddenly make you less competitive. I mean, and I should have said at the beginning, really in our office in Vancouver, we're not the market experts. We cover the globe. And so our offices in Washington, D.C., for example, have some specialists that talk about Buy American. So, happy to kind of connect you to them. I mean, I'm paid to be concerned about things, and to be on the watch, and I would say I am slightly concerned. I think no matter your side on the issue, Keystone is sort of an example that they are less concerned. They're not as concerned as we would like them to be about sort of what maybe in our national interest. And so, the fact that was day one, that, like we said, Buy American is generally a sort of preaching to the local populace. And sort of like Katri mentioned, foreign companies don't vote. So we do have a challenge here, and there's sort of two pieces. Like I say, I'm not an expert, but my understanding of the issue is there's sort of two challenges. There is an existing Buy America framework that by and large will not change with there's a recent executive order that won't really impact us. We predict, but the challenge will be with the new stimulus package, which will be new legislation, which will include changes to the sort of Buy American structure, and will be sort of outside of the WTO structure that sort of exempts us or allows us exemption from some of their issues. And obviously this goes, to every individual product and industry sector is going to be different. Consumer products, you're going to have a lot less challenges. If you're, selling into the military, obviously there's already been challenges. We see it sort of the MDA example in Vancouver being sort of the big one where, essentially the reverse takeover, buying a US subsidiary to essentially, become an American company to access that government procurement. So if you're, in the government procurement, government infrastructure business, there certainly is increasing concern.
Excellent. I have a question here from David. It's for Tammy, and I'm actually going to ask David to clarify one thing. He asked, does EDC finance infrastructure improvements? Are those infrastructure improvements that you're asking about within Canada or outside of Canada?
Yeah, that is within Canada, specifically for being able to facilitate exporting.
So good question. So EDC can provide financing to Canadian companies for the purposes of helping them grow their export sales. So it could be infrastructure improvements. We are not a real estate lender, for example, so we're not going to help with a mortgage or with leasehold improvements. Typically a bank is going to be doing that, or BDC. So that's not the type of business that we'll get into, but in some cases, we could look at financing a production line, for example. So somebody is acquiring equipment to create another production line, and that the output from that production line is going to be exported. That would make sense for us, in terms of mandate. It would make sense to us in terms of financing something like that. So yes, there are cases where we can provide financing within Canada if the use of funds is appropriate from an exporting perspective. Hopefully that helps.
I think that was a fantastic answer. Katri, a question from Jay. Any insights on setting up a service company that operates in the US and Canada? Can you incorporate in both jurisdictions and have some sort of umbrella structure, or what are some options there? And barring that every case is like a snowflake and unique, are there some sort of general rules of thumb?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the most common tax answer. It depends. So what does happen is, usually depending on, really, it comes to your exit strategy and what kind of business you're in. So funnily enough, when you're in tax, you always plan for the exit, not the entry. because you want to make sure that if you are looking to sell your business or you bring in new partners, that your tax structure is the most beneficial to the owners on exit. So it's like we don't plan the prenup, we plan the divorce. So yeah, definitely like the common structure would be that you'd have, if you're all Canadian, having a Canadian company with a US subsidiary. However, if you're looking to sell the US business or possibly sell the Canadian business separately, and you want to make sure you're preserving your super enhanced capital gains exemption, then you might do a sister structure. So usually if you have employees in another country, we do recommend incorporating, one, to shield your liability issues, two, to address all the payroll issues, three, to help, as Tammy mentioned, just setting up a bank account. Trying to set up a bank account in the US if you're not a US company. Well, there's a meme where you bang your head against the wall. That's more pleasant than actually trying to get it accomplished. So it really depends on what your goals are. If it's one project, I would say it's subsidiary. If you are looking to make an international company, you might be sister corporations with a holding company structure. It depends on your personal tax situation as well. So tax planning is a holistic approach. But glad to, Jay, take it offline and talk to you more specifically.
There's a question here from Philip, and I think it's more for Tammy and Mylan. You talk about exports, and he's looking specifically to learn about whether that includes when you integrate services or goods from elsewhere in the mix. So say you're setting up a project, or you're providing the services externally and it's installing equipment from, say, Italy. I don't know, and maybe if I'm not characterizing that properly, Philip can jump in, but would that kind of fall under what the services or the products that you would consider to be exports, even if it does include some portion of foreign content?
So I'm happy to take that one first. Hi, Philip. Nice to see you. So we recognize that not everything is made in Canada. So there are instances where you're going to have to source supply outside of Canada. It doesn't make sense necessarily to bring it here, integrate into into a product that you then ship back out of Canada again. So, or maybe it's a project where it requires civil works in the local market. Yes. So we would look at what is the overall project? How much is being sourced from elsewhere? What is the Canadian value? So we always come back to, from an EDC mandate perspective, we always come back to what is the Canadian benefit? So not so much Canadian content, but Canadian benefit. So, are the sort of higher level jobs held here in Canada? Is the intellectual property in Canada? Do you retain the maybe the production of the secret sauce here, and then everything else is locally sourced? So those are the sort of dynamics that we are looking at in terms of looking at local sourced products or products sourced outside of Canada. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and for us, it's very, very similar in that we don't have a sort of specific metric other than to say looking at the economic benefit to Canada. And I would add that we regularly work with all sorts of service providers. So if you think about say, for example, an engineering company that does infrastructure development in foreign countries, there is a clear economic benefit for us to help them win a contract to develop an infrastructure project in a foreign market, and so it's not really reliant on whether they're using Canadian steel for building a bridge, but the fact that the company is an engineering company in Vancouver, and if we help them win a contract there, or find new customers, or introduce them to government procurement folks, that's probably going to grow jobs in Vancouver. So I think that's probably the easiest way to go about it in terms of explanation. I mean, there's definitely things that for us a sort of client definition is sometimes less relevant as a sort of request definition. If you come to us with a specific request, that's when we're going to go, is this request, you know, bringing economic benefit to Canada? So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. Economic benefit to Canada. That's what we all want. I have a question for Katri. You sort of described your process as you see most companies go through, starting with direct sales, and then you went on to at least terrify my frail little heart, because I'm allergic to paperwork, around all the different state and federal layers of taxation you may have to be eligible for. Do you have to understand all those things sort of before you know, can you sort of go and get sales and then work out the paperwork later, as it may vary from state to state? Or do you really recommend that all of the legwork and preparation be kind of done up front? Or do you see risks or advantages to either the shoot first and ask questions later sort of approach that clearly appeals to me?
Well, I guess the question there is looking at those Wayfair standards. So if you're shipping a product or a piece of machinery that's over $100,000, that should be an alarm bell that you're possibly subject to some level of taxation. That, of course, you know, applies at sort of at a lower level. If you are just entering into a foreign country, and especially if you're shipping something, usually you'll be dealing with a customs broker who will be already addressing any customs issues. But you have to be mindful that you need to know those things when it comes to pricing of your product, right? Because and your contracts, because if you say our price is this and you don't say that taxes are extra, well, guess what? They have a contract that's going to require for you to eat the tax. And if it's 5% or 10%, that's a huge amount of your profit. So you have to be mindful of that. So it is important before you finalize the contract to understand the VAT issues, the duties issues, because to Tammy's point, and I'm sure that the presentation that EDC will be doing will be discussing all of that, you know, how to write trade contracts. Does that someone answer your question? So with regards to the, you know, the permanent establishment, that's quite a high standard. We deal a lot, obviously, with Canada, US, and helping clients navigate the US taxation web. But it's good to remember from a state perspective, there's that 100,000 and 200 threshold that applies to various states. You know, like I said, it's always better to ask instead of finding out that you've just whittled away 10% of your profit or your gross revenue because you didn't deal with tax issues correctly.
Fair enough. 10% is a lot of margin to give up. So,
and that's on the top line, not your net income. Yeah.
There's a question from Ethan around programs available that can advise on the regulatory hurdles or certifications when entering international markets. Mylan, would that be the program that you first described and that would allow some kind of research into, you know, the viability in certain markets? Would that program cover that, or would there be other programs you know of that would help people assess the challenges to entering a market or certifications required?
Yeah, so I mean, you could definitely use either Can Export Innovation or Can Export SMEs to kind of get a better understanding in terms of, you know, let's say an in-depth understanding of sort of legal, tax, IP issues, for example. So yes, that you could use that program for that. And I would say, so there's a couple things. There are sort of some like sort of tariff finder programs, websites. There are a few other sort of general ones, but at the end of the day, a lot of the times it's very market and product specific, right? So if it's the EU and it's sort of a consumer product, you may be looking for CE designation. And so you can absolutely reach out to us. We have a CE like sort of help tool website resources for that specific market. So the answer is, essentially the resources, the Trade Commissioner Service, that, we're happy to help you in terms of specific markets that you're looking at. I mean, FDA approvals, that one I'm not that familiar with. Probably, the Trade Commissioner Service in that market would have, on the life sciences, say, for example, would have some resources, some tools on FDA approvals. But I don't know. That's not my area. Sorry.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. I would like to take a minute and share a little story. And it's going to be the story I heard a couple of weeks ago, and it's about Carbon Cure. They're another wonderful little Canadian company. And the first international markets that they're going into are Singapore and Chile, not Europe. You would think that they care more about the carbon intensity of their concrete, but they targeted those markets because they have lower regulatory barriers to changing the way people make cement and concrete. And those customers are more focused or more innovative, right? So how do they learn that? How do they decide not to go for the people that, could pay more or who are more interested in the CO2 benefits, but actually who are going to use it first, and where are the lowest barriers to entry on the regulatory side? Chances are they reached out to EDC or the Trade Commissioner Service to learn what they know about those international markets, right? So back to those slides where they said it's connections, it's the things that they know about those markets. It might not even be your customer. It might just generally be knowing that, yeah, they can do new things here. You can't do new things in Europe. It's really, really slow to test and try things where other markets are faster. So really do reach out to all of these people. And what I would like to emphasize is that where I see companies successful at Foresight is where they ask for help. So to Katri's point around, you can just ask. If you're worried, there's somebody out there who probably knows the answer. They might work at MNP. They might work at one of the other government agencies. Ask for the help, and you can quickly get answers, and you will avoid trouble. We want to see big, beautiful exporting companies. We want to be solving problems here and abroad. I want to thank again our panelists for today, Mylan, Tammy, Katri. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge today. Thank you for sharing your emails in the chat where you did, and otherwise I will share them with all the participants, as well as the slides and this recording, should they wish to have a sleep aid sometime in the future to address their insomnia, which is the topic I would like to next address. Is our webinar next week is actually going to be on mental health. What you're doing can be stressful. These are stressful times. We do want to make sure that your team is working at an optimal level. So do join us next week for that. Tony will remind you all of the times and dates. It's Tuesday. It's next week. I think it starts at what, 3 p.m. Pacific?
Yeah.
For those of you in Mountain or Central Time, hopefully you can stay with us. With that, everybody, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye.